Greetings, students, and welcome to communication class. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a little history on the evolution of communication. In the early days of mankind, there have been many forms of rapid communication. Yelling across a distance, smoke signals, horns, drums, and other instruments, all of these used to convey messages, sometime over the pitched din of a battlefield where they needed to coordinate troop movements, which means each person had to know what those signals meant, what that horn meant. But none of this would suffice for intercontinental communication, where the use of messengers, scrolls, carrier pigeons, and other forms were used to convey a message. Some of these could take upwards of a year to arrive at their destination. Imagine waiting a year for that mail you ordered to get to you. In the United States, the Pony Express was founded by three businessmen, William H. Russell, William B. Waddell, and Alexander Majors. And according to Williams of the New York Post, they set out to prove that they could make a 2,000-mile journey in 10 days by horseback. Although a mail system was in place, this was the first ambitious attempt lasting for 18 months of rapid communication across the United States. From the telegraph to the telephone, and now the internet and all of its technologies, rapid communication has become an essential part of our modern infrastructure. And while the Pony Express ultimately failed, it did so because a better form of communication had been developed. One that would allow signals to reach the other side of the United States in mere seconds.
The telegraph's invention in the early 1800s was one of a kind. It was the first way of communication where people could communicate through long distances. There are many different versions of the telegraph, and it can't be narrowed down to one single person who invented it. However, the accomplishments of three individuals, William Cook, Charles Wheatstone, and Samuel Morse, significantly played an impact, and especially on how it got to America. William Cook's telegraph in 1836, he utilized a music box, and when a drum spun, a pin landed on a letter and somebody on the receiving end could write it down. However, there was a flaw. He could only get this to work across the room. So he paired up with Charles Wheatstone, and together they invented the electric telegraph. They used a series of wires in which they utilized Ohm's law, which says current in a circuit is proportional to the electromotive force that was driving it. So they used a series of resistors in order to be able to get the message to receive at longer distances. And then Samuel Morse came in. Samuel Morse, which the name you may know because of Morse code, he invented a series of dots and dashes which signified the letters that the telegraph would send. However, when he invented this idea in his own telegraph, he disagreed with Wheatstone and Cook, and he took his own way, and he took his idea to America. So when Cook got to America, his telegraph had a moving piece of paper, and a pencil would drop, and it would record these dots and dashes to get a message to somebody. So he took his idea, and in March of 1844 received a $30,000 grant from the U.S. government to create his telegraph under the supervision from the U.S. Post Office. By May of 1844, just 2 months later, he successfully sent a message, "What God hath brought," from Baltimore to Washington. Over the next few years, 1846 to 1848, there was more lines established, at least 4 that spanned from New York to Washington to New Orleans and to St. Louis. So once the telegraph was invented, this revolutionized the way that people in America communicated. So now that you have a better understanding of the telegraph, there's still a lot more ways in which communication revolutionized in America. And the next major invention was the invention of the telephone. Let's tell you about that now.
Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you, uttered Alexander Graham Bell to Thomas Watson in 1875, shortly after creating and patenting the telephone, which revolutionized communication. His invention was widely disputed due to the devices within the phone being created by others and the timing of him filing his patents. According to the article, Who Invented the Telephone? Lawyers, Patents, and the Judgments of History, Bell won over 600 court cases upholding that he created the telephone and the network it transmits on. However, some of his patents did expire in 1893 and 1894. And from the early 21st century to the present, the telephone and the network has changed drastically. Manned switchboards became automatic electronic switchboards. There were numerous changes in actual phone design and construction of better and smaller receivers. The rotary dial phone, which was in service the longest and the most popular, was replaced with touch-tone signal phones. Now, the Bell Telephone Company, which was started by his father-in-law, housed the Bell Network, which was bought out by American Telephone and Telegraph, or AT&T. The phone went from being wired with limited mobility to handheld with much more mobility, and the invention of the cellular phone was a monumental leap forward in telephone history. The AT&T Bell Labs had a major hand in creating the first cell phone. Several scientists from Bell Labs laid the foundation for the cell network in the late 1950s. However, it wasn't until the late 1960s that the technology was finalized. On April 3rd, 1975, the first cell phone call was made between Martin Copper of Motorola and Dr. Joel S. Engel of Bell Labs. Cell phones nowadays, thanks to microtechnology and manufacturing, went from being big, bulky, and weighing 2 to 3 pounds to being sleek, small, and light as a feather. The network of cell phones grew as fast as cell phones did. The analog network, or first generation, or 1G as we know it, was started in Tokyo in 1975. Since then, we've had the 2G network from Finland, 1991. The mobile broadband network, 3G, also in Tokyo, 2001. And now the native IP network, or 4G network, started in the United States in 2009. And it treats all calls like other forms of streaming audio, utilizing the LAN network, wireless networks, and voice over internet protocol. The introduction of telephones and cellular phones revolutionized almost every facet of life, from communication to business, and even utilizes the widespread use of the internet, which has its own telephone-like technology, voice over internet protocol.
As you can see, class, communications have come a long way since the early days of mankind, and even the early 1900s in the United States. We've gone from snail mail, Pony Express, moved on to the telegraph, and the telephone, and now the internet and all of its technologies. Who knows where communications will be in the next 100 years? Who knows where it'll be in the next 10 years? It's amazing to think how far we've come in so little time and how far we have yet to go. I don't know where we'll end up, but I know that you all will be part of the driving force of the evolution of communication in the near future. Thank you.